I'm Peter Just. I teach anthropology here at Williams College, and I'm going to talk a little bit about classroom discussions. I think there's an expectation in all but the largest lecture classes that we're going to have a classroom discussion. Students, I think, expect it because it's one of those things that makes a small, expensive liberal arts college different from a big, inexpensive state school. I think it makes them feel validated. I think it makes them feel empowered. I think they're not unlike many of us professors who are rather charmed by the sound of our own voices. And I think we kind of expect that as well. We like to have classroom discussions often because it seems more interactive, it seems more human, because it seems less dull, and because sometimes it seems a little easier. Although I think I would argue that we should probably spend as much time preparing our discussions as we spend preparing our lectures. Nonetheless, we tend, I think, in a class of 30 or fewer students to want to have classroom discussions. I think I want to start by saying that there's a case to be made often for not having a classroom discussion. If you have a lot of information or very subtle or complex ideas that you want to get across, having a classroom discussion may not be the most efficient way of doing it. I think students may recognize that and feel that they'd rather have a concise and clear lecture or instead of a halting and awkward discussion. I remember also my son, who's a student at another NESCAC school, telling me that he didn't particularly care for classroom discussions. He'd rather listen to his professor, who knew what he was talking about, than to listen to his classmates who were just as ignorant as he is. So before having a classroom discussion, you may want to ask yourself, why am I having this discussion? I can think of three good reasons at least, there are probably more, for having a classroom discussion. The first would be that pedagogical theory, that a student learns better, learns more enduringly when he or she has put the material together himself or herself in his or her own words, when they've gone through a sort of process of intellectual construction. That, to put it more succinctly, a lesson achieved is better than a lesson received. If you're going to if that's your principal motivation in having a classroom discussion, I think you want to see to it that you have a specific goal in mind for that discussion, that it's structured, and that it works through that process in a clear and coherent way. Another goal, another reason for having classroom discussions is that they provide an opportunity for our students to sharpen their skills at presenting an argument in public before an audience, if you will. It calls on us, I think, often to push our students, to press them to be about the logic of their arguments, about the coherence of their arguments. That can make them squirm sometimes, but I think done with good humor and a gentle touch, it can still be an invaluable lesson, and students can come away with a much greater ability to actually hold their own in a verbal discussion among peers, a skill that will be useful to them later in life as well. For me as an anthropologist, the greatest value for classroom discussions, I think, comes from it's their ability to really access and tap into the diverse experiences and backgrounds and life histories of our students. It's one of those places where we go through a lot of trouble to construct a diverse student body, and a classroom discussion is one place where everybody can benefit from the diversity that we achieve in that way. I can remember, for example, in my Anthro 101 class once, I was talking about the shift from subsistence to cash economies under colonial regimes, and the way that those colonial governments would use a head tax that had to be paid in cash as a way of pushing peasants out of a subsistence economy and into a cash cropping economy. And one of my students, who was Bengali, said, "Oh my goodness, I just realized this lullaby my grandmother used to sing to me was about growing mustard seed in the rice field so that we could pay the tax man." And that kind of thing is just invaluable. It's a vivid image. It really, I'm sure everyone in the classroom will remember that, ideally for the rest of their lives. So I think that's a really good reason for having the classroom discussion as well. I think there's some do's and don'ts that you want to think about when you're going through your class, when you're having a classroom discussion. One is to have it, don't start off or don't try to make things too vague. You probably don't want to begin a classroom discussion by saying, well, you know, and what did you think of Moby Dick? General questions that just kind of seem to want to elicit student reactions, student opinions, I think, don't do the trick of keeping things focused and moving things along. At the same time, and this is the other end of the spectrum, you want to avoid playing that game of, you know, what am I thinking? Asking the same question or rewording it over and over again until you get the response that you're looking for. Students figure out right away that that's the game you're playing, and I think it must be very frustrating for them as well. You know, I think they just must be feeling, why the hell didn't you just come and tell us what you're thinking instead of making us try to guess? Somewhere in between those extremes, I think there's a happy medium. It's tough to find, but I think it can be done. I think you want to have then a specific goal for a classroom discussion. And it's not a bad idea often to announce it, to say something to your students like, well, I think I'd like to spend the next 20 minutes talking about Marx's idea of commodity fetishism, and let's do that. And then if a student in the discussion begins to go off onto a tangent, begins to diverge from that, it's perfectly okay to say, well, you know, that's a great idea, I'd like to get back to that maybe at another time, but right now, let's talk about commodity fetishism. I think that's a useful sort of thing to do as well. I think you want to keep it, you want to find that modality, that means of doing, of conducting things that's most comfortable for you. I think that's most effective, and if you discover a means for having a discussion that's seems to be unique or unlike other people, don't be afraid to go ahead with that. Some people like to structure discussions specifically around debates, and I know some instructors who will stop the class, divide the students into groups, ask them to sort of discuss among themselves, to take a position on a particular thing, and then come back together and make it a more or less formal debate. That works for some people. Another way of kind of starting things off in a sort of fairly focused way, giving people something to get their teeth into, might be to start simply by reading a short passage from one of the readings for that class, and use that as a jumping off point so that they have something concrete to go with. Whatever, I think you'll find your own way to your own style of leading classroom discussions.